I feel like when you can see both sides, it helps in all aspects of your life, right? So it doesn't have to just be certain issues, but like crisis management at work. Oh, I can see why this person feels this way, or I can see why my boss feels this way. This is why I feel like what's happening. I think practicing mindfulness and self-awareness are two things that really help. So, okay, like what am I looking at right now? Okay, that table could be brown, but it could also be dark brown, looking at what it's at. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't like make a huge difference. Just being able to have that self-awareness. Like, does it impact me at the end of the day? Did I paint the table? Like, do I know really what exact color it is? I don't know. It's just, I think we're so focused on being right that it actually hinders us more than just seeing both sides.
Welcome to the Storycraft Podcast for storytellers. I'm your host, Meg Adams, and I'm here to help you explore how stories shape our connections. Wondering how stories help you network and advance? Looking to bridge online and face-to-face worlds, foster understanding, and ignite innovation? Look no further. Whether you're a leader, communicator, educator, or just love a good story, join us for actionable insights and real talk with professional storytellers, all aimed at helping you build stronger, better connections. So Olivia, I'm curious to know, so I know this, but for listeners, tell us about how you got into your career as a broadcast journalist. What drew you to professional storytelling?
That was a great question. Really, writing. So when I was in 8th grade, I did creative writing contests. And I won a lot of them. And so I was asking my mom on the way home from one where I won a trophy, and I just loved, you got a prompt and you would just write to the prompt. And I'm like, what can I do with this for the rest of my life? I knew you could be a doctor, I knew you could be a nurse, things like that, but I didn't know what can I do for writing. She's like, journalism. So naturally I took every elective in high school I could, college, every college I toured, I needed to make sure there was a newspaper and a television station. So yeah, it started my writing competitions in 8th grade. So yeah.
What about video? What drew you to video storytelling?
I think learning how important video storytelling is as we move forward in the digital realm it wasn't as much a passion as in seeing where the future was leading, right? And you do a lot of writing to the video work that you also do, so they're definitely coupled. But I think what's unique about video is you actually capture the person's emotions and the scenery. You can only write so descriptively about all of those things. So while I think I need to learn this skill set to be successful, I think it's very important, if not more important, in my industry to have good video.
Absolutely. Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your career. So we're here in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Nice outside.
It's so random. Would you ever thought that?
Yeah, give us the background of your career. So where you started, how your skill set as a storyteller developed to where you are now.
Yeah, I would have never thought I would leave Columbus, Ohio. That was just, I love Columbus. I think you knew that from the time we met. So obviously graduated Findlay during the pandemic. Got my first job as an MMJ in Columbus. I had produced on weekends, so started as a weekend producer in Columbus, worked my way up to be an MMJ by trying to prove myself through doing freelance packages. And then I decided that I wanted to anchor, and there was no upward mobility, so I just looked around the country, and whatever offered me the best offer and kind of the best environment as far as a newsroom and leaders, and now I'm in Savannah, Georgia as an anchor reporter, so doing both.
That's awesome. You glossed this over, but you started out in journalism in 2020.
Yes.
So it feels like the world was
I know.
Crazy. We can all say chaotic. Can you talk a little bit about the stories that you told and what it was like, working in that environment?
I don't think I will ever tell more important stories that I can think of than that first year of my career, right? I don't think, because, you go back, the presidential race, the 2020 presidential race, I covered Donald Trump twice. I covered Mike Pence twice. You have the Black Lives Matter protests. So I'm covering protests, racial injustice. And then thousands of people are dying from this mysterious virus that we don't know how to control. And you're half scared for your life going out to cover these things because you're not vaccinated. You don't know the science behind the virus and what it could do to you. but then you also understand the importance of needing to tell these stories, right? So, I mean, that first month producing, every 30 minutes, I needed 3 different updates about COVID across the globe. That was every show, every 30 minutes for an 11-hour workday, because Spectrum's on a wheel, so it's constant news. So every 30 minutes, I had to go, and I checked every wire across the world. In every 30 minutes, there were at least 3 new things about COVID, and just so much information, so much disarray. And yeah, I really can't think of something else that would happen like that. I'm sure it will, but it was crazy to start in that time.
What do you think it taught you, sort of like leaping into the career? Like you mentioned it, you said, I was going out, I was telling stories, everybody was inside, but we needed to get that information. What is it like sort of balancing emotions and like your own personal mental health, like during those times?
It's a good question. I feel like a positive and negative about me is that I do wear my heart on my sleeve. So I think in one sense, it helps you relate more to people. And then in the other sense, you do kind of get caught up in the story and you carry a lot of those emotions home. Or, you know, if you're scared about catching a virus, it's probably going to rub off on whoever you're interviewing. So I don't know. I'm always honest with people. In a lot of the Black Lives Matter stories in specific, where I would go into the room, I'd say, hey, I don't understand what you're going through. I'm a white, blonde female. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I want to learn. I've read. I've tried to educate myself. So I think acknowledging the emotion and explaining it, if it's necessary, is fine. I think we've lost a lot of empathy, and I think that's something that I pride myself on still having. But I think twofold, the mental health conversation is tough when you do wear your heart on your sleeve in this career.
Yeah, I think anyone who's out there telling stories, you know, whatever that looks like. We know, which is really cool, there's so many different careers that you can do, or so many different ways you can apply that. You talked a little bit about bias, I think. So one of the things that I think is a benefit of being a professional storyteller is you are going to naturally have, I think, a more broad perspective than your average everyday person, because you, as you mentioned, are putting yourself into these places and positions where you're talking to people who are not like you at all, right? And it's your job to try and understand their story. So can you talk about a little bit more about how you like front end that? Like, because I think a lot of people, this is a long way of asking this question, a long-winded way of asking it. A lot of people's problem with journalism is they're like, oh, the media is not fair.
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of times that's just because it's not aligned with their ideological perspective. So how do you tell more honest stories knowing that you're bringing that bias to the story?
It's so funny because I didn't cover a single Democrat my entire career in Columbus. I was always the Republicans, and I got to cover the Statehouse. Obviously, I kind of filled that role when we lost someone. So I only covered the Republican side, which is we hate the media, you know, very far right, you know, push the media further back. I got cursed at, I got spit on, whole 9 yards. And I think that's the ultimate test that, hey, I'm here to cover a rally. I'm going to talk to people that support this person. I'm going to hear his message, and I'm just going to give people the information. I don't know. And sometimes I would even try to explain to people, hey, I'm just a local news channel. You know, I'm not a national outlet. I gave that speech a handful of times. I thought it was going to help. It probably didn't. But hey, I'm not a CNN. I'm not a Fox News. I don't get paid to say things. You know, I get in trouble if I do that. So, yeah, it was interesting. I think you just learn how to stay neutral. And then I think I'm very self-aware. So it's like checking yourself when you feel the bias creeping in. You know, because there were times during this election in Georgia where I would disagree with a candidate, and a congresswoman yelled at me during an interview for asking a question that I had to ask. And, you know, I could have posted that on Twitter. I could have posted the full thing of her just going off on me. I'm like, okay, take a step back. Like, that maybe was a bad day. And, you know, this is clearly the worst of her. I'm not going to show that because it would be bias. Okay, I don't agree with her viewpoints. She was rude to me. So I'm just going to post this little clip of her yelling at me. So I think it's just being self-aware.
It sounds like you have your own set of values, right? That you're not going to compromise.
For sure. Well, I don't think that's why storytellers get into this. You know, they're not talking head, you know, so I think that everyone that gets into this for storytelling and writing and video, that's kind of what their goal is.
Yeah.
You know.
Have you ever been to a story, or is there a memory in your career where you walked into something thinking it was going to be one thing and you walked out thinking a totally different way?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
And you just have to call your boss and say, hey, this is totally not what I thought. You know, and there have been some times, unfortunately, candidly, that they will still want to stick with that narrative. You know, I mean, Southwest is a great example. They had that ground stop a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. So I went to the airport to see if there were any major delays. There weren't. And they're like, well, you know, the Southwest thing in Christmas, still just film something, we'll put it in. And I'm like, there's, you know, no story. You know, no one was delayed. And I know that you thought that's what was going to happen and it didn't. So I will speak up. I think sometimes it's up to the higher ups. And that goes into a whole other thing about ratings and filling time and a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Have you ever?
Yeah.
Well, and this is like, so the audiences of this we're talking about professional storytellers. So
yeah, right.
PR, marketing, education, journalism. What advice do you have for walking in somewhere where they're like, here's the story you have to do, but we need another angle? Like, how do you figure that out on the go?
It's a good question. I think you just have to really go in with an open mind, right? And you can read a press release for me, or you can read through an article and have an idea of where something's going to go. But at the end of the day, you have to be open-minded. And I think that that's how you prepare. You just go in, okay, here's the baseline. But if things change, they change. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I used to do the same. We still do the same thing. So we do video for marketing. And I'm like, well, we're just going to find the story. We're going to come in. And same thing we did as a journalist.
It's just
we're going to talk to you. It might be different.
Yeah.
But so this goes into my next question, which is like, what's the value? I know you're not a marketer. You're a journalist.
Yeah.
But if you can put on like a hat.
Yeah, I can put on my
marketing.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah.
But what argument would you make for more authentic, honest, like personal narrative-driven storytelling in marketing and PR?
I think people care about people, right? So you watch a news story and you like the story about the dog and the senior citizen. You know, that there's you don't really like the story when it's like cut and dry, bullet points, boring, I feel like, because you attach to the hero.
Yeah.
So I think of what you like to see, right? Do you like the bullet points, XYZ, here's my product? Or do you like that, okay, there's this person and my products impacted this life, and let me share you, like, I think people like people at the end of the day. You know, I think that's why companionship is such a big thing. I think that's why we gravitate towards other people. So I just think that it makes any argument stronger. We're always told to find a character, even in news. Because there's a reason. They wouldn't say find a character and go through all that hassle and add more time to your day if it wasn't proven to be successful and help them in ratings somehow. So it works.
Right. Love what you're hearing on this podcast? Consider booking me to speak at your next event. Dive further into the transformative power of storytelling with my keynote, Tell Better Stories, Speak Up, Stand Out, and Build Community. In a world that often amplifies our differences, my talk invites you to embrace genuine connections. Break free from the echo chambers and discover the art of storytelling. Learn how to share your own narrative, listen actively, and foster communities that flourish on shared experiences. Check out the show notes to learn more about how to book a talk for your next event. Yeah, and so if we think about the media in general, which I would say like PR, marketing, all of that, right? How we're definitely in an era where it's just nobody trusts anything, which is like really scary for society. So what do you think, what are the techniques that people can take from journalism, like for storytelling, to create more authentic, honest stories? How do you think that could help us?
It's funny because I think it piggybacks off the last question of get to know your journalists, get to know your community. Because if you can say, hey, I know Olivia, she was at this luncheon, or she goes to my church, then you're more likely to trust what that person's going to say. Obviously, that's not always feasible. So, you know, doing the background checking. Where does this person work? What company is he or she owned by or work for? But I think the people that I trust the most as a news consumer too and even working with public relations professionals and educators, we do stories with teachers all the time, is, okay, how did I interact with this person? Do they come off as genuine? Do I trust them? Do I like their mission? So I feel like getting to know the people on a local level. National news, it's difficult to get to know the people, but I don't know. It's so hard because I get it. And I'll tell people that too. I mean, I was yelled at by an interviewee. I'm like, I get it all the time. And she's like, that's horrible. You shouldn't get it all the time. And I'm like, I understand. I mean, there's just such like this big distrust. But I think, hey, if you actually get to know the people, you follow them on social media, you like their work, you've seen their work, it's a variety of work, multiple sources, multiple types of people, not just one demographic. I think that's how I don't know, that's how I trust people in the news.
What role do you think storytelling plays in building that trust inside of communities?
I think because you're giving people a voice, and when you just sit down and let them talk and then tell the story. I mean, I have been threatened by city officials, hey, don't twist this. And it's not my job, right? I'm going to talk to the community member that's mad about this issue, and then I'm going to talk to you to see, your response, and then I'm going to simply put them together, right? So I've had people, text me after that and say, yeah, we really appreciated the story. It wasn't one side or the other, because people need information and they need their voices heard. And that's what we're doing at the end of the day. That's the goal, is to be that voice, is to convey that information. And that's needed in society. You can't have a society without information being conveyed. And especially in the digital space, yes, I mean, you can get on Twitter. Twitter's a mess right now. So I think that's helping our field, to be honest, is the demise of Twitter. But yeah, I mean, people need stories and people need information. So I think that's always going to come through, and people are always going to realize that in their communities.
Have you ever had a situation like where you've thought one thing? I think we've all experienced this, but I'm just curious to know, as a journalist, where you're trained essentially to look at something from both sides, right? You have to listen to this side, like you said, you have to listen to this side, you bring them together. Have you ever been so emotionally moved by a story, and I don't know if you could talk about it as maybe a specific example, where you've walked out and you're like, oh my gosh, I was just so wrong. Like, I can't believe how off my perspective was, but now that I've had this unique situation where I'm forced to look at it from both sides, and then I have the responsibility to tell this story. And holy crap, I was wrong.
Oh, for sure. All the time. I think we always hear from the community first. So you get these passionate community members, and they're mad about an issue, so mad that they actually took the time to reach out to the news, right? So that already says enough. And recently that happened where a woman in a nearby community was so mad because the city's trying to take her land and she owns it and XYZ. And you're like, oh, that's horrible. And if she doesn't turn over her land, the city's going to sue her. And it's this big rabbit hole. So I finally get in touch with city officials, and it turns out that these roads, the deeds and the documents belonging to these roads and who own them, were burned in the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
Because we're a Civil War area. And so as a result, their property is close to the road, and they believe that because, they built the property and the road's connected to the property, it's their property by default, but it's technically not. So that was something where, I am listening to the community member, and they're passionate and they're going to lose their land, and I can empathize with that. But then you get the facts, and okay, well, how do you decide who owns the land if it's burned down in the Civil War?
Okay, we had to pause the podcast to let you in on this opportunity. If you're ready to elevate your brand storytelling, don't miss our training, Tell Better Stories, led by me, a seasoned television journalist and PR professor, and Kyle, an on-air meteorologist and video storytelling expert. This workshop unveils our secrets to craft compelling, personal-driven narratives that resonate with your audience. Learn our distinct approach that puts people first and brands second, leveraging 6 storytelling elements for maximum impact. Walk away with actionable strategies, tactics, and a clear process to replicate success in any organization. Check out the show notes to learn more about this offer or reach out to homeplacecreative@gmail.com. It's messy, right? And I think a lot of things in life are messy and they're gray. They're not black and white.
Right.
As a journalist, what do you think you take from, you just said, this perspective switch? I mean, you just said, this happens to me all the time.
Right.
Your average person, even if you're in PR, marketing, education, we don't get that chance. Like, you don't get the chance. It's not your job to live in the gray. It's not your job to look at the facts. So what would your advice be to people to kind of, like, you take this with you. It's just probably how you operate now.
Yeah.
What would you say to, like, your person who is in communication, not necessarily journalism, that they can do to get better at that?
I feel like when you can see both sides, it helps in all aspects of your life, right? So it doesn't have to just be certain issues, but like crisis management at work. Oh, I can see why this person feels this way, or I can see why my boss feels this way. This is why I feel like what's happening. I think practicing mindfulness and self-awareness are two things that really help. So, okay, like, what am I looking at right now? Okay, that table could be brown, but it could also be dark brown, looking at what it's at. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't like make a huge difference. Just being able to have that self-awareness. Like, does it impact me at the end of the day? Did I paint the table? Like, do I know really what exact color it is? I don't know. It's just, I think we're so focused on being right that it actually hinders us more than just seeing both sides. So how to practice it is a really good question. I think talking to people with different viewpoints, like civilly. I mean, I have neighbors who were very different in viewpoints, being in the South and me, being from a very liberal city. And we just can talk about it. And I can see, hey, I understand why this person feels this way. It doesn't take away from my viewpoint, but I'm still going to hear them out. Yeah. So I think talking to people with differences, trying not to get upset about it. And then what does the bias really do to your life? Why does it impact you to feel so strongly one way or another? I think it is actually more of a burden.
Absolutely.
To be so clung on to a certain viewpoint. So I don't know if there's maybe a telltale way of like, I'm such a let's fix the problem type person. Yeah. I feel like it's just like a self-awareness and talking with people and reading and watching the news and even books you read these days. I mean, one of the books I'm reading has so many different types of people, like lesbian couple and things that like I would read romance novels like my whole life. And that was never even talked about. So I think we're moving in a way that diversity and different viewpoints and I don't know, but it's a tough one. I can see why people want to be one way or the other, but it's more of a burden.
That's a great piece of advice. Yeah, a good way to point that out. So final question is, what advice do you have to our friends in marketing and education?
I love that.
Yeah, they're like, okay, yes, I'm on board. I want to tell more stories. Yeah. I want to get this into my lesson plan or my marketing. What if you could give them any piece of advice, what would it be?
I think finding those strong characters to attach with. Because when you think of watching movies, there's always the character that you want to cheer for. And you watch the movie all the way through and you actually take in the message because of that person. Like if movies didn't have main characters, you're probably not going to take the lesson away from a Disney movie, like an Encanto or a Little Mermaid, So I think finding those strong characters is one. Develop a relationship with everyone you're working with, whether it's, people that you're trying to get on your campaign, your staffers. I just feel like the more positive the environment and the more positive with the clients, the better the experience is going to be. We all have bad days. We do, you know, but maybe just communicate that, because I think the more authentic you can be around everyone you're working with, including clients, students, your staffers, I think that helps with everyone's goals.
Definitely. Good. That's great advice, Olivia.
I don't know.
We say that all the time.
I'm just an empathetic person. You got the right person. I'm just I'm a sensitive SOB. It doesn't help sometimes.
It makes things harder, but also
he can attest.
Yes, the empathy, the storytelling drives that.
I know.
That's how you are. Okay, rapid fire time. You ready?
Sweet, yes,
okay.
let's do it.
What is your all-time favorite story? So book, movie, documentary, song.
Mamma Mia.
Mamma Mia? Oh, you answered that so
Song,
fast.
movie, musical, all of it.
All of it
Anytime
in
I'm
one.
sad, I just turn it on, sing the
Yeah.
music. I get so into the plot. I've seen it a million times. I love
I love
it.
Oh, is it like the theater version or like the movie?
Probably the movie.
The movie with who's in that?
Amanda Seyfried, Meryl
That's right.
Streep.
Yes, I was gonna say Meryl Streep. Okay. I've only
such
seen
a
that part of the
sucker.
way through. I need to finish the whole
Well, it's connected to memories, right? So
Okay.
my mom and I would watch it, and before that, babysitters would play the soundtrack, and so it's always just had good memories
It's
attached to
nostalgic
it.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's probably my
That's
favorite.
cool. Okay. Either the best piece of storytelling advice that you've ever got, or the worst advice that you have to warn us about, so we don't ever do it.
Oh, the worst and
Best.
the best.
You can give one or the other.
One
if you
or
want,
the other,
or you can do both.
Always bring your headphones. If you don't, I'm just kidding. If you don't, you're going straight to the ground. So many.
That was good.
I mean, I've been burned, and other people have been burned. The best piece of advice. I mean, aim for the heart. 100%. What sticks out to you is going to stick out to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think always going for the emotion in any story that you're telling. And just be genuine. I'll always just go back to that.
Mhm.
Empathy, heart, all of those things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the worst. That's a really good question. God, there's got to be some bad pieces of advice that I'm like, nope,
Throw that one
not
out.
doing that.
It's okay.
Always bring your business cards too.
Oh yeah.
I've gotten burned so many times.
Where's your business
Network. Okay.
Well, like LinkedIn, you can find
right.
me.
That's true.
Okay, and then the last question is, how do you define storytelling in your own
Ooh.
words?
Storytelling is transporting people to a different place through words, through video, through all of the mediums that it can encompass. You're telling a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be information, because if people are watching a story information-based, they're still learning about a bill. It's still taking them to the state house. It's still taking them to a place. And then if it's a true character-based story about that senior citizen with the dog at the nursing home, you're at the nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're the parent of the senior. Maybe you're the granddaughter of the senior. So I feel like it really transports you to different places and makes you feel things. That's what I always try to aim in what I do.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
I don't know. And I just because I literally used to write all the time, and I just pulled up my old blog, and every single one is like, okay, I knew exactly what I was feeling in this moment, but I told it in a way that it transported you to a different place, and I don't know. You're telling a story. You're supposed to transport the person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not.
Well, when you transport people, though, then you can see things through their eyes, and then you can develop that empathy.
Yeah.
You can start to be like, well, it's not my experience, but
Right.
I can understand your experience more fully, and then I widen my perspective,
Right.
which makes us all better.
That's what we try to do, right?
Yeah,
That's what we
absolutely.
try to do in these
We're
fields.
so glad you've listened to this podcast episode. If you liked it, would you mind doing us a favor? Share this episode with someone who would be interested in the topic too. We're on a mission to help everyone become a better storyteller. And don't forget to subscribe to the show to get updated every time we release a new episode. Each and every episode is produced, hosted, and edited by us, Meg and Kyle Adams at Home Place Creative. Happy storytelling.